Hello and welcome to Global ID's Data Governance 2.0 webinar. My name is Priya Mishra and I will be your host today. Today's webinar is presented by Dr. Arka Mukherjee, Global ID's founder and CEO. And our guest speaker is Michele Goetz, Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. Before we get started, here are a few housekeeping comments. Today's webinar is being recorded and the recording will be available on Global ID's website. A link to download today's presentation will be available in a follow-up email. All attendees will be on listen-only mode, but please feel free to post your comments during the session in the questions window on the right of your screen. Please indicate who you are addressing the question to, Dr. Mukherjee or Michele. We will answer as many as time allows at the end. It is now my pleasure to turn the webinar over to Dr. Arka Mukherjee.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for taking time to join our webinar this afternoon. Welcome. Data governance has become a very important topic to most large organizations as they figure out ways of handling large data volumes and complexity. It is my pleasure to introduce Michele, who's an expert on data governance. And so Michele, I'll just turn this over to you. Michele, if you can spend 30 to 35 minutes on your part of the presentation, I'll do my presentation in about 20 minutes, and if you have any questions at the end, we'll answer that. So with that said, let me turn this over to you, and just, okay.
Thanks, Arka. So we're going to talk about governing the data ecosystem, and what's different about this, oops, doesn't seem to be moving. There we go. And what's different about our world today is that it's much more sophisticated than what we've operated in before, which means that we really need a new approach to the way that we govern data. So what do we mean by that? We're really living in this age of the customer where information is available anytime, anywhere, and the customer is really in control of the types of experiences that they want. They can find any type of information about the products that they're looking to purchase, and it's really really redefining and shaping our market. And as people within companies who are selling in a B2B or a B2C scenario, it doesn't really matter. We need to operate in this new paradigm. And the things that we're really thinking about are how can we transform the experience? How can we leverage mobile and the mobile mind shift to connect to our customers not only at the time of purchase, but as they're leading up to the purchase, as they're identifying their wants and needs and exploring their options and opportunities to have better life experiences. This all translates into really becoming a digital disruptor. How can you use digital mechanisms, whether that's your mobile devices, your web experiences, or even the automation and intelligence that you put behind these systems so that you can operate at the speed of your customer and the speed of the market, as well as the speed of your competition. And then lastly, what's running throughout this is insights that you can gain, not just about what's happening within your business, but what's happening on the side of your customer, and what's their experience, what's their motivation, and how can you really put data to work for you. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. So if we jump forward, let me just give you a picture of what does this new world look like. SureNow is a company that's offering microinsurance. And microinsurance is a way to insure things like skis and pianos and all the things that you own. It's not the big property and casualty types of policies that you have, but the little things that actually mean a lot to you. And in this scenario, what they've done is provided a mobile device that allows you to be on top of a mountain, looking down in your ski equipment that you've just purchased, and say to yourself, you know what? I might not be in the best position here, and I could lose my skis, I could break my bindings, something can happen. And in this case, the skier can go right to their mobile device, click and purchase a policy right on the mountain, right in the experience. Not only is this game-changing for an industry and creates new business models for the industry, but the orchestration that has to happen behind the scenes to make that experience work and create that new business model is fairly sophisticated. It's combining a number of different business processes, marketing, sales, underwriting, and connecting into other types of claims and revenue systems that might be there and actuarial systems to assess the validity of allowing that type of policy purchase. It's dealing with a wide infrastructure that's knitting together all of the application systems and systems of record to make that happen. And at the center of this, you're governing the data so that you can link your customer to potential existing policies that that customer has, as well as linking that information across the different business stakeholders who have a vested interest in driving this policy. That's real disruption. So I talked about the fact that we operate in a world of a systems of record and a systems of engagement. That systems of record can be on-premise in your databases and your application systems. It can exist in the cloud. You may also be gathering information from third parties like a Dun & Bradstreet or an Axiom or an Experian or a LexisNexis, or even from your partners or sensors within the market, within your devices or within the products that you sell. But what's really important to recognize is that your systems of engagement don't look at that data the same way that it might exist within your systems of record. The data within your systems of engagement, your mobile devices, your applications, your web environment, that translates into the business process, into the view of that customer. And that layer of translation is really the context. It's assuring the quality of that information. It's understanding the underlying semantics and that business representation. It's accounting for data security so that you can manage access and privacy. And you can also apply lifecycle management to deal with the volatility and the changes of, within your market and with your customer and with your business. All of that exists in data governance. In the past, we thought of data governance as a way to manage that for your systems themselves. But in Data Governance 2.0, what we're really talking about is driving data in context to create relevancy for the business. So what does this mean? How does this operate? This operates in an example here around a travel experience. If you think about when you want to take a vacation, you're booking your travel on an airline, and there's a variety of things that are going on underneath the covers here. You have different core processes in your system of records. You have flight reservation systems. You're dealing with customer loyalty. You are managing scheduling systems, and you're managing baggage handling. And it seems like all of this is, kind of running within these independent silos, but the reality is at the time that a reservation is booked, understanding the loyalty program that a customer is in or that your membership level as a traveler will determine, do you get better seating? Do you get different point levels? Do you have different access to products and services and food on that flight than others may not have? For the baggage handling, you may have priority baggage where your bags come out first. All that needs to be coordinated on top of the fact that in the scheduling systems, airlines can't just think about how to schedule their airlines, getting you from point A to point B and operating within the airport system itself, but they also have to think about their partners. And in the example of, say, United, where they're looking at creating a retail experience in the sky, they're also coordinating with their partners to deliver on the different types of products that might be made available in flight that you can purchase as a traveler. And to make this happen, you have to govern that data. You have to know how information from one process to another, from one system of record to another system of record, makes it, is in context and can be shared appropriately. It may exist differently within those systems, but sometimes it has to come together to make sense, to create that relevancy, and in turn, to actually deliver on a great travel experience for you as the traveler. Keep going, sorry. So that doesn't seem to be moving. Apologize. There we go. But what this is also demonstrating is that we don't operate anymore within a linear value chain. No longer do we just get raw materials, create products, bring them to market, and then they're purchased. This happens across a variety of channels in a multi-channel environment. And in fact, not all of these steps in a value chain necessarily happen within the four walls of our organization, but also may be carried out by different partners, whether they're suppliers or retailers, or we're leveraging digital services. We may even outsource the marketing activities to bring something to market. And it probably depends on the different products in the different regions that you're in. There's a huge amount of sophistication in our value chains today, and they're highly, highly dynamic. Now, to orchestrate all of this, we are talking about data governance. All that information is really what's going to make those value chains effective, which is really going to drive your business forward. If you don't have the data, if you can't create data insights, you're running your business blind. Now, governance in the past has seemed, sort of counterintuitive to creating flexibility and agility in your business. And even, you've seen oftentimes with the advent of big data capabilities that the need for speed seems to outweigh the need for really governing and trusting your data. But I wanted to share a few things because the reality is while there are common challenges that do exist, people think, well, data is not my job, it'll slow us down. Or, from a technology management perspective, you've collected all your requirements and you've, assured the quality of information within those systems of record or within your warehouse environment. You think your data is fine. You're not hearing anything from the business. And the other thing that comes up is governance has been tried a number of times. I've talked to organizations where they're in their third and fourth iteration of creating a strategic data governance program, and they always run into challenges. So there's a lot of roadblocks that, and perceptions around that. But the reality is to make this work, and where data governance 2.0 really comes in and shows its worth to the business is there's always the understanding that everybody knows what's in it for me. You as an organization need to be thinking about what's in it for you and what's in it for your organization. And I just wanted to share some statistics here that really demonstrate data governance oriented towards business outcomes and towards what, the what's in it for me paradigm means that if you're embarking on big data, rather than slowing it down, organizations tend to be 4 times more likely to be effective in their data governance program and their maturity levels. They're able to keep pace with the changes within the business and be ready for the data economy. Open up those new avenues with data, either to improve existing business processes or even to be sharing information and creating new business models. And then lastly, the reason why this works is because a core competency within data governance is about planning, that you're able to be forward-thinking and to position yourself well for those changes and those new opportunities. And organizations that have strong planning capabilities rather than slowing you down are 6 times more likely to outperform lagging companies or typical companies. And the reason why is that the motto isn't just about protecting the organization in a risk-focused perspective, but it's also about driving strategic growth and opportunity. It has to both protect and serve your organization. And the way that you do it is first thinking about what's in it for me, balancing the different needs and priorities within your organization based off the amount of risk that is both from, lowering total cost of ownership and driving towards profitability in levels of efficiency, as well as protecting yourself against any sort of compliance issues. But on the other hand, you do have to drive top-line top-line objectives. And governance hasn't always been associated with that, but it can be. So you want to be thinking about how can better data, better access to information, more relevant data really help you grow your top accounts or position you for strategic growth and new business models. Now, the core of governance capabilities are the same. The difference being that principles and priorities aren't a spoke on the wheel, but they're actually at the core. You always are asking yourself, what's in it for me? That drives transparency and accountability. It tells you what you're measuring against. It tells you whether governance is going to be effective and not effective, not just within the program and your data management capabilities, but also for your business overall. It means that you're better positioned to put the right roles and responsibilities into place and staff those roles and responsibilities effectively. It tells you which governance processes are most important, and it's driving down the policies that are going to make you effective. And then lastly, it's about the technology that you put in. The first thing that you need to think about is creating this common language. Business stakeholders and IT stakeholders have a very different way of looking at data and determining whether they're supporting the business or not supporting the business. Oftentimes, from an IT perspective, we're thinking very much about the physical state. As I said before, how you manage data within your systems. Think about it in terms of domains and data elements and data attributes and the schemas or structure that you see in things like your warehouse environment or your operational data stores. But from a business perspective, it's a little looser. It's really about trust. Business stakeholders operate around their guiding principles. They want to know what's relevant, which means that they can use that information for their business purposes. They want to make sure that the information is in the moment, that they know things change, but they want it to be up to date so that they can make up-to-date decisions. And then lastly, they need the data available, but it's also an accessibility issue. They need to know where the data is. They need to know how to get it, and they need to know how to incorporate that. And really what you're trying to do is translate what those business requirements are, that aspect of trust, into the elements that you want to manage from a systems perspective. Now, in the traditional world, in our first generation or our first attempts of data governance, we often operated in a somewhat siloed and chaotic aspect. The 5 pillars of governance, from information and data quality, master data management, standardization tools, data security and privacy, and data lifecycle management, were not only disconnected, but they, in terms of the way that you manage them, but also the skills and the programs, operated in different areas within your organization and had different objectives. And in fact, a lot of the roles that were governing those tended to be more technically oriented or quasi-technically oriented. But moving forward, what you need to be thinking about, if you're going to align your data to business outcomes and constantly thinking about what's in it for me, you have to recognize where the interdependencies are between those 5 areas of governance. And a really good example of that is to think about, what do you need to know from a data security and privacy perspective? You need to know who's accessing the data. You probably need to know organizational structure. You need to know the types of service contracts or obligations that you have to be able to share or not share that data. And the foundation of that is, what are the definitions and classifications that you've created out of your master data management program? So rather than driving a data security and privacy initiative around tribal knowledge and independently creating that, you can really re-leverage a lot of the artifacts and definitions that you've done from a master data component. And the best way to get to that point is you're incorporating more roles outside of those tech roles into the areas where they are thinking about those 5 areas cross-functionally. Those are your business users, because at the same time they're trying to understand their customer, they're also thinking about the decay of the information about that customer. They're thinking about how they segment and classify customers. They're also thinking about, is the information right so I can communicate with my customers? And lastly, they're always thinking about the risk associated to providing access or reaching out to those customers, whether it's for marketing purposes and spam or whether you have regulations, say, in healthcare like HIPAA. So this world of data governance that I've been talking about, moving from a 1.0 world to a 2.0 world and talking about what's in it for me, infers the fact that in a protect and serve environment, it's not just a one-size-fits-all anymore, which is really where we were in the past. We had to enforce consistency in our definitions, a single definition of a customer, a single way of managing all of our data, and everything had to be in a controlled environment. And that works very well in a legal and compliance and regulatory environment, as well as simplifies standards that are created by the technology teams. But the reality is that if you're moving into an area and an objective of what's in it for me and business outcomes, you need to take on other archetypes that are looking for transformation and opportunity that's driving towards value and agility. Now, the other thing to take into account is not only in the outcomes and what you're trying to achieve or the fate of your business by these archetypes, but also how tight are those controls around your data. In areas of high risk, you're of course going to want to have very controlled, very protected data, but in other types of scenarios, sometimes data can be good enough, and the controls are a little bit looser and they're more like guardrails. And you see that oftentimes within big data environments. But what I want to point out here, too, is that in the Data Governance 2.0 world, you're really increasing the scale and scope of your data governance efforts. And in that scenario, your data governance teams, no matter how well staffed and how good they are in terms of their subject matter expertise, are really not able to cover all of the different scenarios and see everything that's happening with your organization. And that's really where data citizenship comes up, where you're creating an archetype that's really around the culture of data within your organization, not just for the select few that are sponsoring your governance programs or that operate within your governance programs or even within your IT organization. Every consumer of data, both within your organization and external to your organization, should have a role to play in feedback, in sponsorship, and contribution to assure that your data is best aligned to the outcomes that you want to achieve with that. Now, why these archetypes are really important is because you've redefined Data Governance 2.0 to that what's in it for me scenario. And what that does is it creates a program to execute on that's around certification. And what do I mean by data certification? A data certification program takes into account that you're intimately understanding what data is used for, how data will be accessed, who's going to access the data, and what level of data quality is needed to ensure that you get the most value and the biggest impact for your business from that data. There's a lot of context that's related to that, and simply looking at your systems and exploring information in your systems isn't enough. You really need to think about what is the derived data, what is the information that's being displayed in the final deliverable, whether that's a report or an analysis, or whether that's right within a business process and a business application. So when we think about certification, we go back and we have to take into account how are we going to trust and govern our information sources. And depending on where it's going to be delivered, you can have a different state of that data, and it's based off of the risk that you're willing to take by sharing that information out. And really in our new world of information governance, the framework is based off of the fact that we can look at the level of trust that you need to have as well as where the data is coming from. Traditionally, governance has focused on that top right controlled area. But I want you to reconsider the fact that sometimes data will be a little bit more casually managed. There might be some additional attributes and elements that are associated to your core controlled data, but they're not used all the time. And maybe the quality of them doesn't have to be quite as high. But in those scenarios where you're going to bring that in, at least you have a good enough scenario to make a decision based off of that information. And in your validated environment, you may be sourcing a lot of external data because you're trying to improve the data that you currently have, or you're trying to compare what you understand about your business by looking at your internal systems to what you see externally. So those are very natural areas for your data governance program to exist in. But I also want you to take into account that there will be an area of your environment that is going to be highly chaotic, where you're going to be bringing in a lot of data externally, where there's still additional sources out there that you don't have control and governance over. And while you may not be directly governing that data in that external or big data environment, you should at least have the policies and processes and procedures in place to understand when you need to access data from that chaotic environment, you can do it in a trusted manner and bring it in within context. And the way that you do that is think about how you certify that data and intelligence across the way that you deliver it. Big data often operates within the exploration and discovery environments, and that time it's usually a good enough types of scenario. And really what you're thinking about in exploration and discovery has more to do with the level of access and how well you want to vet that information before you start making certain types of decisions. Maybe they're not strategic decisions, but they may be decisions that help you move further down the path to make strategic decisions. But as you move forward down into areas like answers, where you're answering questions and you're trying to influence activities within an operational environment, controls have to be tighter. You need to certify that data further. There's more policies and rules that you have to adhere to, as well as thinking about, what are other types of gates that have to happen if you're accessing data from exploration and discovery, or insights from exploration and discovery that are going to help feed into areas that have to be a lot more pristine in the quality of information. And that certainly carries on as you're trying to measure the performance of your business. You want accuracy, especially since people are typically compensated in bonus based off of those metrics. And then lastly, you want to certify your information so that if you did want to share it externally, have a new intelligence capability for your customers, or that you wanted to even open that up to the market, you need to be highly confident that that information is good, or you don't get the value from it. Now, how you address this is you start with what the deliverable is. You have to understand what are the assumptions and the business expectations of that final insight or final report or final data that's presented within a business application. And you think about this in two ways. You think about, how is trust established, and what are the components that you can put into place that allow that trust to be transparent. Lineage and provenance or traceability of the data may be very good. There may be a lot of assumptions done or taken in crafting the types of intelligence and analytics that are produced, and those have to be captured and then provided back up, and so on. But at the same time, that gives you an understanding of what are the types of solutions needed and how will those solutions be utilized. Then you can start thinking about what happens in your systems of record. And your systems of record are your databases, your data marts, your warehouse, maybe even your big data environment. You're using the requirements and components that you addressed in the deliverable itself and translating those down into what do my systems of record have to do to support that. Now, they may be the same or they may be slightly different. That's okay. They don't have to be exactly the same, but they do have to connect to each other because, as we talked about before, you have to translate how data is syntactically managed and physically managed within systems and how that differs from what it looks like and the perception of it for how it's going to be consumed in your systems of engagement. Now, lastly, you have to put a performance management program in place to assure that you're managing your data to that what's in it for me mentality and those business objectives and outcomes. And when we looked at the processes and practices of high-performing data governance programs, what we clearly see is not just that there's a planning process, as I noted earlier, in the why behind doing data governance, but there's always a discussion around alignment with business strategy. You have no data strategy unless it's directly linked to a business strategy. You need to know the outcomes. You need to know the KPIs that you're moving the needle on. And lastly, no performance management program is successful unless you're able to measure and report and provide communication around what you're contributing to that business. It's not good enough just to measure whether your data is complying or not complying with business rules that you're processing against. It's not good enough just to say that you're acting, operationally appropriate for your governance program. In the end, you have to communicate that you're actually moving the needle for the business so that you can sustain it and you can get further investment and progress made to continuously improve as well as maintain the value that you're providing your organization. So in the end, you want to know that these 6 things are happening. 1, you're always grounding your data governance 2.0 process in business outcomes. You do that by having a strong performance management framework that measures to your operations to those business outcomes. You want to be able to create a program that balances that risk and reward mentality, and you do that by using those archetypes that I discussed earlier. You want to allow for those different business objectives. It's not a one-size-fits-all anymore. You have to realize that business units and programs and projects operate differently, but you do want them to be able to tick and tie up at the top. You overcome data conflicts and silos of dynamic ecosystems this way because you're aligning your archetypes and you're addressing where data has to support the business, not just how it has to look within your data systems, and ultimately drive towards data citizenship to scale your program, create a culture for data that allows you to flourish and create value from it. So with that, what I'll do is pass on over to Arka, and he'll take you through the next session. And I believe he has the poll for you, too.
Yes, there are some questions from the audience. Michelle will answer it at the end if it's okay.
Yes.
All right, so Michelle described the transition from data governance 1.0 to 2.0 and highlighted the fact that there is a potential increase in scale and a potential increase in complexity. So the core questions that she has asked is, how do you certify data? How do you, create provenance around data? How do you measure and optimize security, privacy? How do you integrate master data? These questions can perhaps be answered if we take a different perspective on governance. So in my presentation in the next 20 minutes, I'll talk about essentially how global IDs sees the context of governance, how we look at ecosystems, the science that we apply towards solving these very complex problems, how different aspects of governance, risk, compliance essentially become ecosystem problems, and then at the end we'll end with a QA session. So as this transition happens in the world where we move from enterprise data ecosystems to these big data ecosystems, and there is a significant change in the cost equation, we think that there's a certain amount of discipline that's required in order to make this transition. Right? And that discipline is required because the data complexity thresholds are going up exponentially. So if you look at data growth, both volume and complexity is going up exponentially. Budgets are more or less flat. And so there's going to be a growing shortfall in terms of how to deal with governance of large ecosystems. So this makes it inevitable that we have to think differently about the problems. And we think that there are 3 aspects about thinking differently. Right? The first aspect is thinking about governing silos versus governing ecosystems. Right? For the past 40 years, most of our thinking has been guided around silos. How do you optimize silos? How do we do projects? How do we build applications? Right? think of parts of the organization, the ecosystems thinking encourages us to think in terms of the whole. Right? And so there are few organizations that essentially look at the whole and say, look, if we were able to understand the whole through automated means, perhaps these complex problems could be tractable. So Global IDs over the last 13 years has been looking at problems like governance as ecosystem problems and making sure that we have the ability to understand all the parts. The second differentiation in thinking is about speed. Traditionally, we've looked at doing things with people, sometimes armies of people, right? But how do we transition our thinking in terms of machine? So how do we go from a human-centric processing of information to a machine-centric processing of information? Of course, the most successful companies of our age, organizations like Google and Amazon, have essentially transitioned over to the machine-centric world, where they primarily process information using machines. Right? So we are encouraging our customers to think about this transition from human centricity to machine centricity. And then the third aspect of our thinking is related to ad hoc versus systemic. Most of the projects that we do are, in a sense, ad hoc projects in response to a particular problem that has been identified. Let's say there's a data quality problem, we do a data quality project. If there's some area of master data that appears to be not harmonized, we need to bring it together in a master data project. So we always think about projects in response to certain problems. What we are encouraging our customers to do is to think systematically. Is it possible to really understand the ecosystem as a whole and process data in a systematic, automated way? And so if we were able to do that, then we could deal with the scale of large organizations and large ecosystems. So these three areas require a different kind of thinking. I'll just talk about some of our work over here, and in terms of how we look at data ecosystems. So if you look at a typical Fortune 100 company, there are about 10,000 databases. We've encountered many of our customers have hundreds of thousands of databases, and there's a large number of applications. There's at least 10 million columns of data. The flow of information across these databases is complex, and everything's dynamic and evolving. Right? So that is an ecosystem, and the core questions that need to be answered about the ecosystem is, what data do I have in the ecosystem? Do I have a full inventory of my assets? How much can I trust the data? Can I measure and perhaps certify the quality of the information? How can I take information that's disparate, bring it together? Problems that have been traditionally addressed through master data management. And then the fourth question is, how do I act on the insight to make a better business decision? So the first three questions are potentially answerable with the ecosystem approach. The last one, of course, is related to humans and related to a subject matter expertise of the business. So in this way of thinking, data ecosystems require more systems thinking, the kind of thing that engineers have been talking about in operations research for many decades. Right? And we think that problems like governance, data rationalization, risk, compliance, security, and privacy are examples of ecosystem problems. That you cannot really solve these problems unless you understand the ecosystem. You can solve smaller problems related to silos, but you really can't solve the overall problem unless you understand the ecosystem. And so as we go back to our view that this major shift is happening as we transition from enterprise data systems to big data systems, we think that it requires new things, new thinking and new tools to bring the ecosystem together. So let's spend a couple of minutes just talking briefly about the science behind this. There is a wonderful book written by two professors from MIT called The Second Machine Age. And I would encourage everyone to at least take a look at the summary. And they essentially say that we are at a different point in time, that we've moved through the industrial age, we moved through the information economy, now we're moving into the second machine age, where a majority of the grunt work will be done by machines. And they say that this is important because we've, for the first time in our history, we've reached the second half of the chessboard. And what that essentially means is that as digital technologies double every year, after it has doubled 32 times and we reach 2 billion things, human comprehension of information ceases to exist. At that point, machines take over. And so this transition to the second half of the chessboard means that we have to evolve from human-centric thinking to machine-centric thinking. And so Global IDs embraces that idea in its machine-centric approach towards data management, where we use tens of thousands of software agents to carry out complex processing of data ecosystems. And so the science that's required in order to address this set of problems is related to inductive logic, right, where we statistically enumerate the data ecosystem, and we get a quantitative measure of the complexity of the environment. In the second step, we semantically resolve the environment. So the question that we are asking there is, does an organization really need 10,000 databases, and does it really need 10 million columns of distinct information? In our work, we see that these 10 million columns of information can be resolved to approximately 10,000 distinct business domains. And so that semantic resolution allows us to make the business a tractable problem, data governance at that 10,000 domain level, a tractable problem. We have to, of course, classify all these domains, and we use Bayesian logic to do that classification. And then in the fourth step, we create large graph databases which link everything together. So each part of the data across the data landscape becomes linked, and as we populate the graph database. If you take this approach, which is generally the approach taken by many of these machine-centric companies, this allows us to make the ecosystem a tractable problem. Currently, of course, if we try to attempt this through a manual effort, it is intractable. But this approach makes the problem a tractable. So I mentioned before that governance, risk, compliance, and security are ecosystem problems. And so if we look at governance and quality, right, things like master data, rules, controls, how do we do this at an ecosystem problem, at the ecosystem level, right? So because we have large amount of master data, tens of thousands of tables with master data, perhaps an order of magnitude higher in terms of rules and controls, right? So it's really a massive problem, right? So if we can potentially automate the discovery, statistical and semantic analysis of these things, the governance becomes feasible at that level. In financial services, regulatory compliance is a big issue, right? As we look at global regulations impacting large financial services organizations, we see that these problems are also ecosystem problems. You can't really look at a silo and solve these problems. You actually have to look at the whole, right? So how do you essentially get an understanding of the whole to understand issues like quality and provenance and lineage in these environments? In the area of risk, because we do not see the ecosystem clearly, it is opaque. Yeah, there's a lot of hidden risk that's inside the data ecosystem. So in order to surface the hidden risk, there's a necessity for taking the legal entities and understanding and aggregating risk. Lastly, in the area of data security, there's we are transitioning from the view of perimeter monitoring, where we are looking at the ring fence around the organization, to a point where we say that, eventually someone is going to breach the perimeter. What do we do at that point? So if you monitor the ecosystem, you can of course see abnormal activity in different data assets that you have. So those are 4 ecosystem problems that we traditionally work with. And how do we do it? We have a step-by-step approach in terms of looking at these ecosystems and solving the problems that I mentioned. So our first step of the process is to harvest the ecosystem. Essentially, we deploy lots of machines, could be virtual machines, etc., to harvest the metadata from the ecosystem. This is a discovery process which goes and analyzes all the assets, the data assets that you have across the organization, and it's done at the scale of 10 to 100,000 databases, and by 100% automated process. Right? So we are able to sort of harvest all the information in the data ecosystem through this mechanism. In the second step, we do a complete statistical analysis of the ecosystem. Right? So we've extended the concept of profiling to what we call semantic profiling, to essentially go into data centers that are spread out over the world and statistically enumerate the behavior of the data across the whole ecosystem. So if you have, let's say, 10 million columns of data, the software will create 10 million 10 million reports with detailed analysis of each of the columns that you have in the data ecosystem. So we think that that is a foundation of machine learning that allows us to go to the next step, which is the resolution of the ecosystem. And in the resolution part, what we do is we take those 10 to 100 million columns that we have discovered, and we resolve them into areas or buckets of information that is widely used across the environment. As I said before, when we go through this exercise, we see that organizations really run their business on 10 to 20,000 distinct things. They don't run their business on 10 million things. Those 10 million things are just redundant or semantic variations of the core domains. So this resolution of the ecosystem semantics allows us to understand how the business of an organization works and what's important from a data perspective. Once you have done that, now the problem has become tractable. You're no longer trying to govern 10 million things. You're trying to govern 10,000 things, which of course machines can do quite well. And so one can automate the measurement of quality and create metrics and perhaps certificates associated with the data. Right? So this particular picture is a snapshot that comes out of our software that shows how master data quality is evolving over time. Right? So one can automate different aspects of quality. In the fifth step, you want to also understand who's using the information and what's the access to it. So the software has the ability to look at usage of the information and say who is using the information in these 10,000 domains, and should we be conscious about the CRUD matrix, who's creating the data, who's reading the data, who's updating the data, who's deleting the data, right? And perhaps who's copying the data as well, right across the whole ecosystem. So this is also a machine-centric problem where one can monitor the data ecosystem to understand usage. And so, if those steps that I described are done earlier, you transition from what is an unknown, poorly understood, and environment with sort of questionable trust to something that is known at a granular level. The ecosystem is known at a granular level. It is understood in a great deal of semantic detail, and it is trusted and measurable. Right? So as you put in more machines, it addresses the issue of cost. Now, needless to say, the underlying theme over here is cost. Right? Instead of using a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of projects, you've taken a systematic approach towards reducing the cost in the data ecosystem. So with that, I'll end my presentation, and I will turn it over to Priya. And Priya, we have a number of questions from the audience. So why don't you go through that? Okay. So, so the first question that we have is, what is the source of data governance effectiveness multipliers with so let me repeat the question once again. What is the source of data governance effectiveness multipliers? And Michele, would you like to answer that?
Sure. Let me see if I understand it. I mean, I think the simple way to describe it is data governance is successful when it allows you to turn data into business value. That the reason why you have data governance programs to improve the quality of information, to secure the information, to classify privacy the appropriate ways, to manage the life cycle of that, have the right standards. You're doing that to gain something for your business, whether that's to reduce daily sales outstanding, so you're bringing in revenue, into your business on time, whether you're avoiding regulatory fines because you've been managing information inappropriately, so it affects your ability to see, for example, Basel II or Basel III, where you have to have proper calculations for your capital positions. So really, that's what grounds your governance program and makes it successful. And you do that through the tenets of aligning to your business objectives and imperatives, having the right, planning around that you're being, disciplined in your way of looking at information and data, not just in your systems, but how it's actually used. And then lastly, putting in the right metrics and performance benchmarks that not only guide the operational aspects around governance, but tell you that you're actually moving in the right direction and you're affecting the business needles that you want to affect. And that's really how you orient your program, so not only is it successful, but it can be sustainable.
Okay. Thank you, Michele. Are there any other questions from the audience? Okay. Michele, I don't see any additional questions from the audience. So I think we are a little bit ahead of time, but we'll give folks back 6 minutes of our time, and we thank everyone for participating. Priya, can you?
Thank you, Michele. Thank you, Dr. Mukherjee, for wonderful presentations. Like I said before, today's recording will be available on Global ID's website. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us for the webinar today. This concludes our webinar. Have a great day.
Okay, bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.